We were gathered here today in front of the Queens Public Flushing Library with 6 other organizations, including the Min권센터, to launch a campaign called "Poverty It's Not What You Think," and it is under the banner of the Undo Poverty Flushing Collaborative, which are local community-based organizations that are really trying to bring up the issue of poverty in Flushing. And the thing is, we all know that poverty exists, but how it manifests and how it comes out in different forms in Flushing, it's still a very undertold story. And we're here today to launch actually a media campaign to start the conversation about what poverty actually looks like, whether it's related to food insecurity or people paying over half of their incomes on rent due to all of the developments going on with high luxury condos, to just job loss because of the pandemic. And right now we're in a place where a lot of people are thinking that the pandemic and the recovery of the pandemic has been done. And we know that that's far from the truth. So, and finally, I think we're trying to have a conversation with our own community. Even with, it's still a very shameful thing to talk about poverty, particularly in the Korean and Asian communities. And we're trying to figure out how do we start getting people to become more open and more confident about talking about their situation. That's what we really need. There's a lot of statistics out there around poverty in Flushing. It's high, but what we really need are the stories of people actually going through the situation of poverty in Flushing. So we're hoping that in the next 2 months we can get some of those stories and get into broader conversations with other elected officials and other community institutions in Flushing and actually how to solve this crisis.
I'm so glad to see so many of you here. So many elected officials, Senator John Liu, and representative from the elected officials office, President Wayne Ho, representative from our partner organization, the Asian American for Equality, the Child Center of New York, Chinese American Planning Council, Min권cen터 for Community Action, and River Fund. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for your support to the library. I'm so glad we have this event here. Over here, it says, "Undo Poverty Flushing." And here, it says, "Poverty is not what you think," which makes me think. I was surprised to learn in Flushing, 8 out of 10 students are qualified for free school lunch, which means their families are at or below 133% of the federal poverty guideline. I'm so surprised the percentage is that high. That's why I'm so glad we have this campaign here. And again, thank you so much for coming, and welcome to Flushing Library.
2 announcements today. The first announcement is that the Flushing Mobility Collaborative is renaming ourselves. Moving forward, we'll now be known as Undo Poverty Flushing. So Undo Poverty Flushing is our collaborative to make sure that community members, community allies, that we continue to work together to change the narrative on poverty, and that we are seeking action, not only grassroots programming, but also policies and legislations to promote upward mobility in Flushing. Secondly, today we are here to announce once again our media campaign, "Poverty, It's Not What You Think." We will use facts, we will use statistics, because we want to share with people what's really happening in the Flushing community. Not only the diverse AAPI community, but other diverse community members that reside in Flushing. We know that we must address poverty directly. Too often we hear about the model minority stereotype in the AAPI community that talks about Asian Americans always succeeding, going to the best schools, and not having struggles. But we know that in a community that needs to be more transparent about the struggles that we have, that all of us as community leaders, as residents, as allies, we need to talk directly about poverty. And one way to do that is that we do need to broadcast that it exists. So we're excited that we are building this campaign with F.Y.Eye, and we are joined today, and you will hear from Jessica Toledano from F.Y.Eye. I also want to acknowledge their creative manager who worked very closely with us, Andrea Wilson, in order to launch this campaign. So as part of this campaign, we will have visuals in 6 different languages: English, simplified Chinese, that was simple for me to say, simplified Chinese, Korean, Spanish, Hindi, and Urdu. The ads will be placed around multiple locations throughout Flushing. So these are physical ads that you can see there will be buildings on Main Street, just a couple blocks north of the press conference at 41st Road. We invite everyone to walk over there today. The rain will stop by the time this press conference is done. So I expect everyone to just take a walk with us and check it out on 41st Road. It's going to be at the Flushing, the Main Street subway station, and then also the nearby Long Island Railroad station.
The reason I think that the coalition wanted me to speak today, it's very unusual for the advertising agency to speak on a campaign, but this one was really special and unusual. We don't talk openly about poverty in this society. We all know it exists, and there's a lot of myths and stigmas around it. And this group, now called Undo Poverty Flushing, had the courage to come out very boldly, and you're going to see if you walk outside the library when we're done and you go to the left, there's a 36-foot poster that we created for them about the realities of poverty here in Flushing. Flushing's poverty is growing 28 times the growth rate of the city as a whole. And so all the things that we keep in our minds, that people who are living in poverty, they don't work, they take entitlement programs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things are myths and stigmas, and this campaign with these community groups had the courage to come out and say that very loudly all over their community. And what we're hoping is all of the foundations that supported this and supported other communities nationally, that we can come together as a coalition and we can help speak out around the country about poverty. Because unfortunately, as we see as F.Y.Eye as a nonprofit media agency working with other nonprofits around the country, is 2% of nonprofits have the budget to advertise in a very crowded media market. So if you walk to Times Square right now, you're not going to see anything about poverty or anything about any nonprofit. What you're going to see is Nike and pharmaceuticals, and that's okay. But all of the nonprofit sector, pretty much in a $285 billion industry, is silenced. And so this campaign and organizations like Gates and Robinhood and the other organizations that funded this campaign are telling our society that we need to have not just consumer brands, but also the public sector and the nonprofit sector not be silenced, because it's essential to our democracy, and that's why F.Y.Eye exists, and we are so proud and humbled to be here today. So thank you.
I'm really excited about this initiative. I certainly want to thank the Robin Hood Foundation for seeing the need in our community. Thank all the partnering organizations for really putting this initiative together. Believe it or not, I got involved in the Asian American community back in high school. It was about 100 years ago when we did not have internet, but we knew back then that the model minority myth was a big problem that served to hold back Asian Americans. Even though it made us sound great, the reality is that it held us back in so many different ways. And today, the model minority myth, as Wayne mentioned, is still unfortunately pretty much alive. We have movies that talk about how rich we are, sometimes crazy, but that is not what the API community is about. This is about a community that is an immigrant community. It's also a community now that has been in this country for generations. I'm a second generationer. My son is now a grown up. He's a third generationer. So we have immigrants, we have people who are totally acclimated and they say Americanized. But it's still a community that has a lot of challenges, and poverty is clearly one of the challenges. It's one of those things that isn't talked about a lot. There still is a stigma to it, which is precisely why we need this kind of knowledge campaign, both within the AAPI community as well as in the larger society that we live in here in New York and beyond. Right here in Flushing, we have seen, in my opinion, a lot of rhetoric that is against poverty. People somehow don't want to recognize that homelessness is an actual problem right here in Flushing that we need a solution for. People don't understand that we have women and children who are hungry right here in Flushing, and specifically in the Asian community. We need to address those head on.
And I think that has to be remembered. This isn't just a thing about resources, right? This is about dignity, about human beings. And I think this is the right time. Because a couple, as terrible as things were, we saw amazing great things too. During the darkest times, we see some of the best things out of people. What we saw, for example, was, during certain times of crisis, we all understood that our lives could be gone at any moment, and we saw that happening to our friends and our family. And no one really questions no one questioned that there's whether or not there should be a paywall to getting a vaccine, right? It didn't matter who they were, who they loved, where they prayed, what their immigration status was. We're all New Yorkers in this, okay? We're all together. When someone showed up during the darkest times and, gratefully someone had the courage to deliver food when everything was locked down, right? We didn't judge anybody or question anybody on their immigration status because we're all New Yorkers. We're all in this together, right? This is the period that we're in. Because what we do know, and I think we collectively understand better now, is that people don't just fall into poverty. Poverty falls onto them. It falls onto us. And so, this is a time to rethink poverty. I think it's time.
So this media campaign launched today means a lot to our community. And as we know, it's a sad fact that millions of Americans still live in poverty today in our country. And just like Ms. Zen was mentioning earlier, I was reading the flyers over there earlier this morning. I was also shocked by some of the stats because I didn't really know how many our child care workers are still food insecure, and how low our health insurance coverage is in our own Flushing. So, and also I know that the new data says our poverty rate in the US is still increasing this year. And Grace has always been dedicated to combat the poverty problem, including bills addressing different issues in poverty, like a homeless problem, affordable housing, minimum wage, and the SNAP program. But we all know that what we have done is far from enough. And a lot of times, it is our ignorance of poverty that creates a lot of more dangers for our people and for our community. And this problem, till today, a very few people understand the extent of poverty in our country. And very few people talk about it. Like all the speakers talked about earlier, we either don't talk about it or we don't know about it. And this topic is definitely not being covered enough. And that is why Grace is very excited for this media campaign launched today. And she is also very grateful for all the community groups here today, as well as F.Y.Eye, for all your effort put in here to change this, to make this very important change of narrative happen. And we are very looking forward for I'm definitely gonna step out later to see all the media, all the billboards, or see at the bus stations, at the billboards later all over in our Flushing. And we hope that by making this topic more obvious, more visible, and eventually more people would be encouraged to acknowledge the problem, talk about the problem, and to realize the problem. And then eventually we are gonna be addressing this problem better and make people's lives better.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Min Yan. I'm representing Senator Toby Stavinsky. First, I want to thank the Robin Hood Foundation and also CPC, AFI, Child Center, and all these community partners to have this great event, this campaign. I think a lot of people are surprised to hear that Asian community has the highest poverty rate, because a lot of people, when they think of Asian community, they think about, oh, they're all like middle class, and in Asian community there is no homelessness problem. But just like Senator Liu said, we do have that problem, and it's just need visibility. I think some people, they are proud to talk about successful stories. They feel ashamed to talk about poverty. But just like John said, it's poverty fault on us. It's not their fault. So I really applaud this campaign. And also my office is looking forward to working with all the community partners to acknowledge and tackle the issue. Thank you.
Hi everybody, thank you for inviting us today, and thank you CPC for all the work you're doing on this, and especially thank you to Robinhood also for your generous funding. I think the numbers in this report were really eye-opening, including that poverty growth in Flushing is 28 times higher than the citywide average. And it's an issue that we don't have enough of a discussion over, both on the city level and I think on the state and federal level. So we're looking forward to working with all of our nonprofit partners to elevate this conversation and make sure that we're prioritizing, as John had mentioned, like culturally competent, linguistic outreach to our community. And Councilmember Ong is always supportive of efforts to kind of elevate this conversation of poverty and to make sure that it's a legislative priority in the City Council. So I just want to thank everybody for all the work you're doing.